Greetings, fellow humans. I am Hugh.
And I am Man.
And together we are definitely not
two kobolds
in a trench coat. We enjoy human activities, such as paying taxes,
having existential crises,
and RPG horror stories. Let's see what we've got today. First up, we have the tale of a horse brothel, an OP who inserted himself into a game, then doesn't realise he was the problem, and a prime example of how not to be disability inclusive at the D&D table.
Am I the bad guy for not letting my D&D players run a horse brothel? By Reddit user Horse Brothel LLC. I'm a DM of a party of 9, so needless to say, things get a little hectic. So when my party's druid came up with the idea to get them some easy coin, I was caught a little off guard. My party just made it to one of the largest cities in the homebrew world, think Waterdeep. The druid asked me if, since there are a lot of people in the city, would the market for people who are interested in a brothel service be bigger? Naturally, I said yes, assuming that he planned on going to a brothel. He instead offered to work in the brothel for a day, assuring the owner maximum profit. With a high charisma roll, the owner agreed and gave the druid a room. The druid then revealed his hand, and the whole time he had planned on using conjure animals in a combination with wild shape to summon a militia of horses with the sole purpose of pleasuring the freaks of the city. This shook me to my core. After almost an hour of arguing with my players, who all jumped on the bandwagon against me, my druid told me that he was putting his hoof down, and I was ruining his fun. He said that if I didn't let him get that bag, he would permanently leave the game. Still, I refused, and he stormed out of the room and later blocked my phone number, ending a 6-year friendship. Am I the bad guy?
I don't think that OP is entirely the bad guy here. When I first heard Horse Brothel and the intention going on here, I was thinking this was going to be some kind of low-key deal, where the druid turned into a stallion and went around the stables of the city, offering the stable owners of the city a magnificent stallion with which to breed a generation of incredibly strong and fast horses. It's a little perverse and a little weird, but that's kind of where I thought this was going, and then it kind of went off a cliff.
It went straight into bestiality, let's be honest.
Yeah, the druid doing what I thought I was kind of bestiality, but at least everyone involved was a horse.
Technically.
Yeah, this is offering bestiality to people, and I get the feeling this was really a bit over the line. If the rest of the players are okay with it, was this worth hitting the brakes on? I'm not sure, but it's definitely perverse.
I'm all for wacky shenanigans and all that, but I feel like DM did the right thing. I think there are some lines that even if the whole party is in favor of, just shouldn't be crossed. And if the DM isn't comfortable with that, then that should matter. Like, I think that people underestimate the DM's comfort in situations like this because they're just thinking about what makes the party members comfortable. But it's like, if your DM is not comfortable with this, then respect that.
I think the bigger issue comes in is how much Druid was actually attached to the idea and how much of a big deal they made when the DM tried to not allow it. It shows they were a bit too wedded to the idea and a bit too into it. And so maybe rather than this being about fun, this might have actually been about acting out a bit of a fetish.
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? It always is. It would have been okay if the Druid had been like, fine, bro, we can back off from this. But the druid was like, no, I'm not going to back down from this, or I'm going to quit because you're not going to let me do what I want.
Yeah, Horse Brothel is a weird hill to die on. A fellow player starts yelling at me out of nowhere, and apparently, that's my fault. By Reddit user, Skyguard on Land. Hey folks, this story goes back about 4 to 5 years. To one of the few times when I broke out of being a forever DM for my group. It was a 5th edition game with 4 players, plus DM. Actors, me. DM, my old time friend dating back to our school years. Noob, someone I brought into the group about 6 months ago by that point. Loud, the one from the title. Barbarian, DM's acquaintance from somewhere, not important for the story. The story starts on the one day when I found out that one of my players is running a D&D campaign without telling me from Noob. And DM says in his defense that I probably wouldn't like it because it's a silly one. I told him it was nonsense and asked him who else plays, and he told me I don't know them. I think that's the point where it went wrong, because DM didn't tell me what to expect from other players. As it turned out later, this was critical information. So I busted out one of the numerous characters that I had from years of not playing, and was pretty much prepped to go in about 3 hours. DM took some time in figuring out scheduling, but in a few days the game indeed began.
Alright, I've played in a few campaigns, and the first one I ever did by myself, apart from you, was with a bunch of people I didn't know. My DM didn't even really tell me who else was going to be in the party. I don't really understand why that's relevant.
I think what they're driving at is the vibe of the players, what kind of people they are and the way they play. It's important to have good chemistry. I mean, not everyone in the group is going to gel well, especially when you're dealing with people you don't know or groups you may have randomly assembled on the internet. So I sort of get where they're coming from there.
Maybe it's just the fact that they sort of forced themselves into the game to begin with, because DM didn't tell them about it. And then he's like, oh, what's this about a game? And they're like, you wouldn't like it. And he's like, try me.
Yeah, knowing what to expect from the other players shouldn't be an issue, unless, of course, someone is a known problem. You should go in with a pretty open mind and be there ready to adapt to whatever game you're in, especially if you're the new player coming in. We were in the Waterdeep as plumbers. The Italian ones that go to different places through green pipes. Yes, really. Our enemies were the plumbers from the opposing guild, Mario and Luigi. Each of us had a tiny origin story, with all of us coming to our guild's employ, and then we were finally out and about. The first place where we went was the market, because our gear was confiscated from us for some reason that I now fail to remember. After everyone geared up, and I spent some time haggling with traders, I encountered the issue that Loud apparently had. Turns out Loud doesn't like sharing money. Either that or he hates it when someone else takes money. I honestly do not know. I was oblivious to this for the time being, but I noticed that he is reluctant to give away his money when someone else needs to buy something but doesn't have enough. After we were done, we received our first assignment of finding a quest person at an abandoned warehouse. We were promised an amount of gold for this, and since my character was a greedy Kalashite, I said so for everyone to hear and indicated that I will take the money for myself if I could get away with it.
I don't really see what the problem is with Loud not giving away his money when somebody else needs it.
Yeah, some parties will have a shared fund, that's very common, and then you have your own individual money for spending on stuff you want. If Loud doesn't want to help you buy something out of their personal funds, that's okay. Especially if your player is a greedy type character. That doesn't necessarily mean they're hoarding anything. It means they might want to have it later for buying an expensive item they're waiting for. Also, hypocritical for you to openly admit your character is greedy and would take all money for themselves, whilst then criticizing another player for doing it kind of the same thing, but not quite as bad.
Yeah, that's a little pot and kettle, I think. Because I don't help out my party members with money.
And that's entirely okay. You can absolutely choose to do that. Partly depends on how critical the item is, but if it's a pure vanity item or some kind of enhancement for your character, other players in the party do not need to help you purchase that. It's nice if they do, but they're under no obligation. Before everyone pulls out pitchforks, I will say that I had no intention of hogging all the gold. I am of the general belief that money in D&D is next to worthless, and is generally more for role-playing than for any practical purpose. My character was greedy, and therefore would be opposed to willingly sharing money with the party. But that did not mean that my character couldn't say, lose, his purse right next to the party member in need of money. I now know that Loud had a problem with that, but he didn't say a word, and neither did anyone else. So after we finished the quest, I took all of the money for myself. At this moment, Loud just exploded. At first, I didn't even understand what was going on. Loud was just ranting about something for several minutes straight. In between his yelling, I managed to put in question of who he was talking to. To my surprise, he said it was me. The reason why I was surprised was because greed was not his only issue with me. Apparently, I was too informal with him, and since we don't know each other, that's a problem. I was baffled, but I did begin to defend myself. At that moment, I forgot all about that, and I was going to roleplay giving money, and just started engaging with him on a personal level, just like he was doing. It all lasted for about 10 minutes, with Noob frantically trying to get us to stop, and DM sat there silently. We eventually did, and the session ended. DM then pulled me aside and told me to never again play evil characters in his campaign, indicating that he blamed me. I tried arguing my case, that I never had any intention of hoarding money, but since I was never invited back, I guess it wasn't convincing enough. I definitely did not handle this whole thing very well, I admit. But when somebody just starts out of nowhere yelling at you at full volume, all other concerns immediately go out of your mind. I never saw that lad ever again, but if that's how he solves disagreements, I doubt he's living a very good life.
Okay, so there's a bit to unpack here. Here, I will side with OP on one thing. Having somebody yell at you out of nowhere is very disconcerting and not the best way to handle conflict.
Yeah, with something that's an in-game thing like this that doesn't involve more severe offences, yelling out of nowhere is a bit much. I would understand if Loud was triggered by something really awful, but this doesn't seem like an excuse for yelling. Loud does get one bad guy point for that at least.
I feel like there's more to this story that OP hasn't told. I think that there's probably more that they were doing they didn't say anything about.
There's a lot of holes in this story, that's quite obvious to me.
The fact that Loud was going after OP for being too familiar, I think OP maybe was having problems with boundaries or something.
OP might have not been behaving in a way towards Loud that was okay. I'm not sure what was going on, but they were clearly being upsetting towards Loud. Loud did not react well by yelling, but at the same time there was a huge chunk missing here.
I would imagine OP was maybe being a bit too on the nose, too serious, because the DM had said this is a silly campaign, and the fact that he was taking things so seriously, I'm guessing that was part of the problem too.
A big red flag for me here actually as to why OP might actually be the problem is the fact that they called one player noob for no good reason. To call someone that when they're not any kind of problem just smacks of edgy teenager in a Call of Duty or Fortnite lobby. It feels very uncalled for and very derogatory of someone who was just relatively new to the group and feels like OP has a bit of an attitude problem towards other people.
Yeah, the fact that he was being excluded from this campaign to begin with, I think should speak volumes as to what kind of person they are. I mean, I'm not saying they were being excluded on purpose, but I feel like maybe they kind of were not invited on purpose to this. The fact that Noob had to be like, oh, by the way, we're doing this. And OP was like, well, I'm in, even though they hadn't been invited is a little like, don't do that, dude.
You inserted yourself into a group and then began causing a problem that you yourself were causing in a worse way. You had a problem with another player not sharing money and then actively did that yourself. As well as you failed to communicate that your player was not actually going to do this. You expected other people to read your minds while not even being able to figure out what they were directly telling you. And it sounds like they're the one actually in the Mushroom Kingdom with how they're viewing this.
Learn to Count. I'm Disabled Mate by Reddit user Nummy Boba. I joined a new campaign at a local library where most of the people already knew each other from a previous campaign. No biggie. In the listing, the DM had specified that this was going to be a story-heavy campaign with less focus on combat, which worked for me, obviously. However, this group had a wonderful person named Todd. Todd was impatient. Todd was snarky. Todd was everything you expect. In the lead up to session 0, he would brush off any comments about roleplay and really just not want to be included in any common backstory, as many of us had decided to have. A few sessions in, I was having the time of my life, but Todd was putting a strain on everyone. He decided that because there was too much NPC interaction, the best thing to do would be to murder hobo everything and everyone. During the roleplay scenes, he would also often butt in and try to get a move on, getting annoyed when it took too long, and would start texting on his phone, even once taking a phone call during a session.
Isn't it wonderful when you can just spot the problem players before you even start? When they're just standing there waving around red flags like they're directing air traffic?
Oh yeah, this guy is a walking red flag. He's like a golf caddy full of red flags. You know, it's so rude when you're taking it's one thing when it's an important phone call, but it doesn't sound like it was an important phone call. To take that during session, come on, bro.
Yeah, hold off your casual phone calls. Of course, take anything important. That's understandable. At the very least, if you're going to need to step away for a minute, mute your microphone.
I love the fact that they had a session 0. The DM explained this was going to be roleplay heavy, and clearly this guy is not a roleplay heavy sort of person. And he's like, fine, this is taking too long. We're just going to murder everybody.
Yeah, at that point, he should probably have backed out. If he had any kind of self-awareness and was clearly not someone happy with a roleplay heavy campaign.
Yeah, well, problem players are not known for being self-aware. Anyway, we were at a dungeon that had been hyped up a lot. DM was super excited about this. We're all excited for this. One thing about me is I have a reading disability with numbers. DM knew before I joined, and everyone was aware of this, it coming up in conversation. I have a special set of dice I made myself to help read the numbers quickly and usually bring the calculator to sessions. However, this day, I had totally forgotten them and was borrowing somebody else's dice. The lovely person sitting next to me was very happy to read the numbers off for me after I had rolled and do the modifier calculations for me, but this seemed to upset Todd for whatever reason. Every time they'd read out for me, he would scoff and roll his eyes. Eventually, he told me I was a big boy who could count to 20 and laughed it off as a joke. I was really embarrassed at his comment, and after another turn, he made a comment again to the person next to him. Don't really know what he said because he was whispering, but he was obviously talking about me. During a quick break, I went to the DM and asked her if she could get Todd to knock it off, but she kind of brushed me off and said that he was right, that I could read the numbers myself.
This really upsets me. It's not OP's fault they have this disability. Some people are dyslexic. I don't know the particular disability, how it would work with numbers, but it's absolutely something you should make an accommodation for at the table. It's not disruptive to have another player read out their numbers and do calculations if someone is willing to help. It's a perfectly reasonable adjustment to make to enable someone else to enjoy D&D.
It seemed that the person that was sitting next to OP was not having a problem with having to help OP, so what does it matter to literally anybody else?
This is outright bullying from Todd, and the worst kinds. Bullying someone for a disability is simply unconscionable to me, and an absolute cardinal sin of D&D.
Yeah, on top of being, a creep and all of that kind of stuff. Honestly, this is one of the worst things, though, because it's like, people can't help being disabled. You can't help it that your brain is functioning a different way than everybody else's. Not your fault. You've done your best to accommodate yourself, but you happen to forget your dice that help accommodate you. Somebody is saying, hey, I'll help. And everybody else is like, oh, this person needs to learn to read numbers. It's really disgusting behavior on the part of Todd and the DM. When we got back to the table, I started reading the dice myself and working out the modifiers and such. And obviously, I was now taking way longer than having someone else do it for me. This also royally upset Todd, but his last straw was when I screwed up and said I got a 21 instead of my actual number 13. When the person next to me realized and corrected my mistake, Todd lost it, telling me off for honestly who knows what. Mid his rant, I looked at our DM and realized that she wasn't going to stick up for me, and neither was anyone else. Even the person sitting next to me could only muster a, "That's not nice." I realized it just wasn't worth dealing with him and left, getting an onslaught of Todd's texts telling me that I had abandoned them and that he was just trying to get me to grow up. Person next to me apologized for not saying much and ended up leaving soon afterwards, from what I hear. It ended because the DM wouldn't stop pandering to Todd's BS.
Sorry, but Todd is an outright bully. First of all, he criticizes you for not being good with numbers and needing help, and then criticizes you for trying to do it yourself. Can't have it both ways. He is just being an outright bad guy here, and DM should have clamped down on him much sooner. I get the feeling he's a bit of an intimidating person, particularly with the nice person sitting next to you not feeling confident saying more. And that's not their fault. You can't fault the player next to you for not necessarily having confidence. It can be really tough to stand up to an intimidating person. At least they were on your side and trying, so I don't think I'd be mad at them. I can absolutely be mad at Todd and the DM.
Yeah, I get the feeling that Todd had probably bullied everybody else in that group up until then, if it was an established group. Yeah, I get the players not really being vocal about standing up for OP, and it sucks. The thing, though, that really bugs me about the situation, other than the fact that the DM was enabling it, is the fact that after OP left, Todd is then texting them and continuing to bully them. It wasn't enough for him to just drive OP out of the game by creating a no-win situation. He then had to follow it up and continued to be a bully to OP for kicks, I guess?
Sounds like one of those people who thinks they can just pressure someone into getting over a disability. That it's just a case of that person pushing through and dealing with it. That's just horrible. I'm so sorry, OP, you had to deal with this guy. And especially with them continuing to harass you afterwards. Pod is an absolute bully. You did nothing wrong. The DM sucks. And nice person did what they could.
Yeah, PSA to anybody out there who thinks that you can just white knuckle your way through a disability. You can't. People can't try harder. They just are different and they're wired different, and you gotta just be okay with that. Hey, Hugh.
Yes, man.
Did you hear about the druid who could wield swords while using wild shape?
No, I didn't.
She had the right to bear arms.
And with that, we have definitely not been
Two kobolds in a trench coat.
Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make the necessary sacrifices to Tiamat. We'll see you next time.